Well, hey there everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Adam, thanks for hanging out with me again today. And today's video, well, we got this little box in. Company reached out to me and asked if I wanted to take a look at their product, and I was like, absolutely. So, the company is SEQURE, S-E-Q-U-R-E. Now, what this is a ESC motor and says Wi-Fi link for a 110 scale crawler. So what it's going in is my SCX-10 II, which currently has a Hobbywing 1080 and a Holmes Hobby Crawlmaster 13-turn brush motor in it. I took this out the other day, got some footage with it driving brushed, and then we're going to get this guy stuck in and take it back out, see how well it does. Now, the one benefit I see to this is it's probably going to be lighter than the setup that we have in here. This is a 3625 Outrunner motor and an uncased ESC. And so I'll show you guys this just in a second. But we're taking out a big, heavier 1080 ESC and probably a much heavier, larger brush motor. So the ESC, I can't remember all the specs on it off the top of my head, but it's 120 amp, 2 to, this says 8S. I thought it said 2 to 6S, but 8S, oh my god. I can't imagine trying to run a crawler off of 8S. But you have a XT60 connector on here. You have a very long connection to your receiver, so you can pretty much mount this anywhere you want to in the rig, and then decent length connections with 4mm bullet plugs on the end for the motor. Now it does come with extra sleeves, so if your protective sleeve does get damaged, you can re-shrink wrap it with these, or if you want, you can modify this sleeve, cut it off of the, there is a heatsink on this side and a heatsink on this side. So you can cut it off to where your heatsinks are exposed, get a little bit more cooling on those, or, you know, if for some reason it does run hot, mount a fan to blow on that to cool it off. But it's a very, very compact ESC, dual capacitors on there. So this does, this is on the AM32 protocols or technology. I am not terribly familiar with it. You do have a QR code here for your instruction manual, and then the motor is in this nice little case. You have a QR code for the manual for the motor as well, some extra heat shrink tubing for the ends if you need to replace, or once you get it connected, if you want to, you know, shrink those together so they can't come apart. Now, this is what got me very interested. That's your motor. That is a tiny little guy. 1625, 1800 kV. Has dual mounting holes for each one, so you can clock your motor however you need to, because you're going to have to clock it to get your wires so they're not interfering with the transmission or frame or whatever. Beefy winds. And for a brush motor, you can hear it, thump, thump, thump. You can feel it, thump, 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 around. So I'm thinking this is going to have a lot of torque. And you can see all the magnets in the can. There's the back of the can. So wide open. So, you know, running it in a lot of mud and yucky situations, maybe not the best. But out on the rocks, out on the trails, this should be just fine. Then you have this tiny little Wi-Fi module. And again, QR code on there to get reference the manuals and everything. Let's see. Escape 32. Yeah, it says Wi-Fi link right on it. I'm definitely going to have to reference the manual for this guy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this stuff installed. Shouldn't need the manuals for that. It should be pretty straightforward. Then I'll dig into the manuals, figure out the Wi-Fi, the programming, everything like that. I'll take some pictures along the way of before and after, and I'll write down some notes of kind of what the settings were in the stock configuration, and if I changed any of those, you know, to make it the way I want it to drive. So I will be back once all that stuff is done, and we'll talk about it. Okay, so as far as install goes, everything installed super easy. It was, if all I did was just swap them in, put a couple zip ties on, and be done, it's a 20-30 minute sit down, pull out everything, and put it back together, and be back on the road. Took a little bit extra time trying to make sure that things were routed well. I've got this carbon fiber battery tray in here, so it's different than stock. So all I did was I just drilled 2 small holes in the very back edge of that carbon fiber and zip tied my wires for the motor and everything going across. And I just tightened up the wires the best I could, make sure nothing's going to get loose and wrapped up in anything. Motor bolts in super easy. And with the doubled up mounting holes in each tab, because you got basically 4 tabs around there, 2 holes in each, so you can adjust it to get it just right to fit your mounting holes. And with this, it has a nice slide, so I was basically just able to clock it, put 2 screws in, put the pinion on, slide it over, donezo. I hooked up the Wi-Fi link, which is super simple to do. All you do is just unplug the input to your receiver from the ESC, plug in the Wi-Fi link. I didn't have any instructions for it, but I did I scanned the QR code, went to the site, found the product, and there isn't just a quick little video on there, and it shows you exactly what to do. Basically, you plug this right into the receiver wires going to your ESC, plug those in. Turn your phone on, power up this, the ESC initializes, energizes this, and this becomes a tiny little Wi-Fi network, or a little Wi-Fi broadcaster. You go through your phone, you go to your Wi-Fi connections, click on that, and you're immediately connected to it, and it brings up the AM32 system controls, and you can change all those. I'll put 2 screenshots of here. And I didn't change anything. Right now, it's exactly how it is out of the box. I didn't change any of the settings. Currently has, I think, 30% drag brake, front and rear, or forwards and reverse. I'm going to leave that as it is. I'm going to see how it does. I did just take it out real quick. Everything is wet outside. It rained last night, so everything is soaking wet. So my previous drive was on dry rocks, so I don't want to go out and wander on wet rocks. So tomorrow, once everything's dried out, I'll get back out there, run around. I just took it out in our woodshed, put it on the wood pile, and drove over the logs. The FOC in this thing is awesome. You squeeze the trigger, you give it a tiny little bit of gas, the motor starts spinning, the truck starts moving, and if you hold that on there, your truck is going to continue to go at that speed. Now you'll see it kind of like when it goes over something, it kind of lurches a little bit. All that is just the slop in the U-joints, the axles, the transmission, all that little bit of slop. It just lurches for a second, but it grabs, and then it just slowly descends down, and then it comes down, and it just starts slowly climbing back up. So the FOC in this thing is really, really nice. I really like that feature. Basically you could set your throttle trim up and just point it at the trail, and then just walk beside it with your camera, so you don't have to focus on driving. It should make for a lot of fun out there. But overall, installation, like I said, super simple. I didn't have to calibrate anything. I had the same exact settings as I had in the original setup. I just turned it on. Everything worked. Now, one note, the bullet connectors from the motor and the bullet connectors from the ESC seem to be a little bit different. Like they just wouldn't plug in and stay plugged in. All I did was I took a little pick, stuck it down on the end of the male side of the bullet, and pried it open a little bit. Basically, there's 4 prongs in there, and they're clasped tight. So I just opened them up a little bit. They slid in, made a good contact. I don't think they're going to come out. So that's the only little bit of issue that I had, was just, you plugged it in, it kind of slid right back out. You could technically crush the female end a little bit, but expanding those little prongs on the male side, a whole lot better. But it's like it's like a 4mm on one side and a 3.5 on the other, so it just kind of, slid right back out. But stretching out those little prongs worked fine. I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna cut here. We're gonna take it out tomorrow and run it out on the rocks, and I'll kind of give you my feedback after that. But so far, very impressed with it. We'll just see how it runs. Does the motor get warm? Does the speed controller get hot? Anything like that out on the rocks. But as far as performance wise, just as great as the brushed one. But the brushed one, you didn't have that ultra fine control down low, and this one forward to reverse is immediate, and it's snappy. All right, guys, so I will see you guys out on the rocks. We'll run it around, and then after that, we'll come back and kind of wrap this up. All right, so we got the motor ESC installed, took it out for a run, and quite impressed with it. Now, what I want to do is just kind of go, you guys saw the, brushless run. In video, it's probably not a ton of difference. Driving feel, it's a good bit of difference, but let me go over some of the pros and cons with you. So, unfortunately, there's two big cons against this for a lot of people. One is there is no power button, so the only way to turn it on and off is to unplug the battery. I know some people are dead set against it. Some people just take the switches off anyway, and that's how they run them. So depending on who you are, where you fall in that group, you may care or not care. For me, I don't really care, but it is nice to be able to, get everything set up, have your battery plugged in, carry your truck to wherever you're going to go, and then just reach in there and push the power button. That is convenient, to where now I do have to, take the body off. I could technically fight my hand up in there with it, but it's just easier to just take the body off and turn it on and off. The other one is the ESC and the motor are not waterproof. So I know that's a deal killer for a lot of folks in the crawling world, even though if you don't run in water all the time, I know some people, just stay on the rocks and never leave the rocks, and then others, rocks, trails, mud puddles, whatever, everything is fair game. So the ESC, the motor should be fine. It's kind of hard to ruin a motor with water, but the ESC is not. Now, obviously, you do get 2 extra pieces of the shrink tubing, so you could cut off the existing shrink tubing and conformal coat the ESC, and pretty much be waterproof at that point. I wouldn't go submarining it, but splashes and some water sitting on it probably isn't going to hurt it. But they do not have currently a waterproof version of this. So that is one of my recommendations I'm going to make to them, is for the crawler ESCs, just conformal coat them from the factory and consider them, at least splash proof. For me, it's not that big of a concern. I don't typically run mine in the water. I have, but I generally don't. One, I don't like the cleanup, and two, there's no reason for me to go out there and splash around the water with it. I think if you're driving around in the snow and stuff like that, probably be fine. But again, you're running the risk of shorting something out. And the third kind of con for it is because it is kind of that flat I would almost say airplane style ESC. You know, it's more typical what you see in a boat or a airplane, that design. It's not the classic square flat case that these are. Mounting it can be a little tricky. Basically, I just put double-sided tape down the edge, stuck it down sideways, and it seems to be firmly attached. And I kind of did all my wiring so it's not getting pulled or pushed or anything like that. The wiring is kind of holding it in place versus, you know, pulling on it or anything. So mounting it can be an issue. Not waterproof can be an issue, and no power button could be an issue. Now, there's a much longer list of pros than there are cons. I just want to get those out of the door. But basically, this thing is super small, super compact, super lightweight. The motor is tiny. If you guys saw the pictures, I'll put it up again. The motor doesn't come out further than the front of the transmission does. So basically, you know, where your drive shaft starts, everything else is behind it. So you have your motor and your transmission case, the transfer case, all that stuff. It almost disappears in there. It's so small. And lightweight, it is lighter than a brush motor. The ESC is lighter than, you know, that whole combo was lighter. It's not going to make a huge bit of difference, but if you are trying to trim down, you know, going from a big heavy brush motor and a chunkier ESC, maybe save some weight. It does come with very long leads, so you have a good long battery wire, you have a good long motor wires, and receiver wire. So, you know, if you're building a dollhouse truck where things need to be put in weird locations, you could put your ESC way up here and your battery way back here or whatever, and you would be able to kind of, you know, work out placement for stuff a lot easier with those long leads. You don't have to solder on extensions. The AM32 design is really nice. It's super easy to change the configuration setups with the little Wi-Fi adapter, but it was super simple to do, and it was set up pretty much perfect for me right out of the box. It has a very good drag brake. The punch and it's got more than enough kick to get you flip back over or, you know, launch off of something. Now, it was running on 3S. It is a slower motor than what this one was. This was the Crawlmaster 13-turn, Crawlmaster Sport 13-turn. This motor is a little bit slower than that motor, but on 3S, you don't really notice it, especially when you're crawling. But if you're trying to run from one place to the other with this thing, you know, like driving a regular RC car, yeah, you'll notice it's slower. Out on the rocks, I didn't really notice that it's any slower, except for the extremely low slow speed control and the FOC. You know, this thing just creeps when you want it to creep, especially downhill. Oh my God, it works so nice. You know, it's a gentle, very slow, controlled descent. And, you know, some of those hills, I'm going downhill like that, and it's just letting it just slowly roll, and it doesn't lurch, it doesn't gain speed, it doesn't, you know, speed up, slow down, anything. It just holds that speed steadily. A lot of the brushless crawling, I just let the FOC go with it. You know, I just held on to the trigger, I did the steering, and it just powered over and controlled descent on a lot of it. If anything, the FOC kind of makes it a little bit too easy. You know, I'm used to, you know, feathering the throttle, give it a little bit more, let off, a little bit more, let off. And this is just, you know, just hold the throttle and it'll just crawl right over pretty much anything. It ran very, very cool. So I ran, and granted, it was cold out there today, but I ran it on the rocks, running it around in the yard, and drove it all the way back in, you know, running it around in the yard, running it back to the house was all full throttle, just, you know, just running around and around and around. Came back in, ESC, it was barely noticeably warm to the touch, and the motor was the same way. You know, if my hands weren't cold, I probably wouldn't even have noticed they were, you know, above body temperature. So, very, very cool running. Lastly, the biggest advantage of it is for a crawler brushless system ready to bolt in and give you some great performance. It is an extremely cheap combo or individually. The motor's inexpensive, the speed control's inexpensive, and the combo together is not expensive either. So, you know, and I'm not replacing expensive. You know, this is a Crawlmaster motor. They're not expensive. 1080 Hobby Wing, they're not terribly expensive. So not really spending a whole lot more or less for going from this brush setup to the brushless. But performance, adjustability, you know, there is a good bit in the 1080, but this has a lot more adjustability, and you know, that FOC control, the slowest speed control, the instant snap-on power, and you know, no sparks. If anybody's ever gone from forward to reverse in a crawler with high drag brakes, knows the of sparks that comes out of it sometimes. But yeah, that is kind of the review. It's a little bit long-winded, I'm sorry, but it's a really neat little combo. I think the biggest drawback for it right now is just not being waterproof. I know that, you know, especially guys down south are going to want to run this, you know, in the mud, in the water, stuff like that, in the snow, and northern guys are going to want to run it in the snow and the slush. You know, but if you're one of the guys that just goes out and runs around on the rocks and you guys don't get your trucks muddy and wet, an excellent choice. But I will keep you guys updated if they do decide to waterproof them in the future. I will let you guys know. Hopefully we'll get continue on with this. They have a small mini crawler motor setup I may order as well. It's very inexpensive also. But yeah, overall, great little package. So thanks a whole ton, SEQURE, for sending this over to me for review. And I'll put a link down in the description to like Amazon and the SEQURE online store if you guys are interested in taking a look, finding out any more info. You know, they have their all the specs and everything on the website, and most of them on Amazon, so you guys can check that out. Anyway, everybody be happy, be healthy, be safe. I will catch you guys on the next one. See ya.